Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. My name is Jeff Perkins. I am the CMO of QASymphony, and thank you for joining this webinar entitled Going Agile, Don't Forget About Testing. Before we begin with the content, I'm just going to walk you through a couple things. First, the audio for this webinar is delivered through your computer. So to watch this webinar, you will either need speakers on your computer or a pair of headsets. If the audio is choppy or seems to be coming in and out, the chances are it's probably an internet connection issue on your end. Actually, the presenters for this webinar, we are going through a phone connection. So if the audio is choppy, try to get maybe closer to your wireless router or check your internet connection. That'll improve your experience. You are able to actually customize the viewing experience in this webinar. All of the widgets on your screen that you see, they're all customizable. You could change the size. You can minimize things that you don't want on the screen, so feel free to do that if you want to maximize the presentation more. I also recommend if you just want to see the slides bigger, you can just zoom in with the browser. That's a good way to increase the size of the slides on the screen. And if you have any questions during the event, you'll see that little Q&A module on your left. Just feel free to submit your questions there. We'll be monitoring them throughout the webinar, and we'll get right back to you. So definitely don't be shy. Ask questions of the presenters, or if you're having any audio or technical issues, please let us know. We'll try to help you out there. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar, so this webinar will be available on demand tomorrow. You'll get an email when it's available with a link so you can watch it back or share with colleagues. We will be live tweeting during the webinar, so if you want to join in on social media, use the hashtag Agile Transformation. And at the end of this webinar, we're going to ask you to take a short survey. And actually, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little Twitter icon, and next to that is the survey icon. You could either click that now and fill out the survey, or wait till the end and it'll pop up when the webinar ends. But we'd love to get your feedback. Let us know how you enjoyed the webinar and give us ideas for future topics. I also want to let you know about our next webinar. We're very excited to feature Alan Richardson in a webinar on June 28th. He's going to be talking about risk mitigation using exploratory and technical testing. Should be a great one. Alan Richardson is the author of Dear Evil Tester, so that will be one you won't want to miss. And actually, if you look at your screen in the top left, we put a link to some resources, and the fourth link there is a link where you can go and sign up right now for that webinar. So we'd encourage you to do that. Use that link, and hopefully we will see you again on June 28th. I'll tell you a little bit about QASymphony. We provide test management software for agile teams. We're very well integrated with Jira. So if you want to do a free trial of QASymphony or you want more information, please visit QASymphony.com, and someone there can get back to you with all your questions. Another great resource for you to check out while you're on QASymphony.com is our library, our resource library, to view past webinars that we've done, to check out ebooks, events, all types of content. So, after the webinar is over, feel free to go check that out and watch some of our previous webinars. And with that, I want to just quickly introduce our two speakers today. Sujit Nair is the Associate Director with the Enterprise Solutions Group at Gallup, and Kevin Dunne is our VP of Strategy and Business Development from QASymphony. Before we jump into the webinar, Sujit, why don't you tell us a little bit about Gallup and the work you do there?
Oh, yeah, sure. As you mentioned, I'm actually part of the Enterprise Solutioning team. I work with the Enterprise Sales team, in fact, basically a solution architect. So I support the sales folks on the West Coast in helping them build scalable testing solutions that we then deploy for our clients. That in a nutshell is the role that I play. As for Gallup, we are actually a pure play independent testing services company. We work with enterprises of all sizes in helping them build robust QA solutions. In terms of our service portfolio, it comprises pretty much anything and everything that falls under QA and testing. In terms of size, we are about 2,000 employees, and a good number of whom are based in U.S. We are, in fact, a subsidiary of Signity Technologies, and together we stand as the #1 testing company in North America. Just to add some more, at Gallup, we've always striven to be a thought leader, and in fact, Gartner has positioned Gallup as a challenger in its latest Magic Quadrant report. We are the only testing company to have that distinction. So that's just a little background about Gallup.
Great, great. Well, without further ado, let me hand it over to Kevin Dunne to start off the webinar. Kevin?
All right. Well, good afternoon and good morning to some of you. Talked to many of you in the past on other webinars. Very excited about this topic today and having a new speaker, a new voice here as well, and in Sujit. So we want to kick things off by asking you guys on the webinar. You should be seeing a simple survey here asking, are you guys Agile or Waterfall in terms of your development process? So please take a second here and fill this out. A lot of teams will have some of both going on. So in that case, just take your best guess of what the majority of teams in your enterprise are doing. So we'll give you a second here to fill that out. All right, so I think we can go ahead and look at the results here. So it looks like more than 80% of people are already doing Agile development, or at least the majority of their team is doing Agile development, and so that's quite fantastic. Typically we would see the number lower than this, so this is really good to see that people are buying in and adopting this trend. I think a lot of people, though, they may have adopted Agile development, Agile planning processes, but in many ways, a lot of times testing can still kind of remain a very waterfall process. And so in this webinar, even if you've become Agile and you've really adopted that, there's a lot of things in here that Sujit and I will cover where you might notice that you might think that you're more Agile than you might actually be, at least as far as it relates to testing. So, just not to belabor the point, and I know that a lot of you guys on the call, you've already adopted Agile, so some of the reasons why you went ahead and did that and why you guys made that decision. But, some of the big drivers for the people on the call that are, not in the loop on these things are these 6 things that we mention here, really pushing teams from kind of a more global perspective towards adopting Agile. So the first big one is, the app economy has obviously changed the way in which, we do business, and people are, constantly getting feedback and able to see, how other people are reviewing apps, for example. And so this has created a lot of transparency and a lot of need for teams to, deliver their app at speed and with good quality. And so that obviously would lend itself to a more Agile process. The cloud has really opened up our ability to release things, release software much more quickly than we were in the past, so we can very easily get software out and make changes without having to do a lot of patches and hot fixes. So that's certainly a big player in our ability to get the most out of being Agile and really drive more of a continuous deployment process as well. In terms of best-of-breed software, there's a lot of real platforms out there that are, coming of age right now, and that's requiring a lot of people to hook into those platforms. So things like Salesforce.com, for example, Atlassian is a good example for us. There are these big platforms that are constantly changing, and people are needing to keep up with the changes on their platforms to make sure that their apps that integrate there are able to continue to work. So that's really driving people towards more frequent releases and more frequent cadences of meeting and discussing potential new requirements and changes to the software. Startups are obviously big. You've got Uber, Airbnb, things like that are really shaking up industry, and these are very fast-moving companies that are nimble and able to change at the drop of a hat. And so a lot of these bigger enterprises are trying to move from being more like a a battleship that takes several years to change course to something more nimble and breaking out into smaller, more agile teams. Open source is obviously opening up the market, making it very easy to build software and get to something workable very quickly. And so, a lot of that is driving this more rapid release cadence. And then finally, digital disruption is obviously huge in things like banking and e-commerce and basically every industry. And people are really going from more traditional desktop apps to mobile and web platforms, and these are oftentimes driving organizations to break up the way that they're structured into smaller teams that focus on those individual platforms and products. So, this should be for everyone who's doing Agile today, it's some form of taking a more waterfall process, which was, a more long-term process where you would do, discrete types of work in longer iterations, and breaking that up into smaller processes, oftentimes where you're doing different things in parallel and you're kind of running cycles within your individual release patterns. So the whole idea of Agile is that, things are constantly changing. The world is no longer a static place. And so, if we define requirements and gather requirements and it takes us 2 years to bring those requirements to fruition as workable software, there's a lot of risk in that because the world can change, competitors can bring out new things, customer desires may change, and we may end up spending all of that time releasing things that are no longer relevant to the market. So a lot of the idea of Agile is really to make sure that you're constantly staying in touch with, your customers and your users, what's going on in the broader technology landscape, and making sure that you have an iterative process in place that you can constantly adapt as these changes come. And so we really see that there are kind of 3 key areas that, need consideration, and, not to oversimplify this, but I think the 3 key areas that really are going to be impacted when you're making a shift from waterfall to more of an agile development and testing process are going to be the process itself, so the way in which, people are working together, and kind of building a process around your company and what your goals are. So I think a lot of times, people will say there'll be a trend around Scrum or around Kanban, or some, specific type of Agile approach, but it's really thinking about, why am I shifting to Agile? Do I want to release software more quickly? Am I trying to eliminate waste and some of the costs? Do I want to drive higher quality, for example? What is it that's really the driver of your process, and therefore what process makes sense for your organization specifically? And then also kind of understanding, not every organization is the same. In many ways, a Fortune 100 bank is going to operate much differently than a 2 or 3 person mobile gaming development shop. And so you really need to acknowledge what restrictions are in place, both internally and externally, maybe regulations or certain laws that might impact you from adopting Agile in certain ways in which other companies might be able to do that. From people perspective, I think people underestimate, an Agile change and what that means for, company culture. For example, in terms of the skill sets that are needed, there's usually a drive, especially around testing, towards needing more technically adept testers that are more collaborative. So oftentimes it does mean that, people need to, be retrained or need to be enabled to be successful in an Agile process, and it's not something that can just happen overnight. It's often a longer-term process. And then finally, tools. I think tools are often overlooked as well, and they're not a silver bullet. There's no one, testing tool or one ALM tool that's going to make you Agile. If you just bring Jira into your organization, that on its own is not going to create a successful Agile transformation. But tools are often something that can help to enable a transition. Also, they can be something that if they're not the right tool and they're more of a waterfall tool, they can really be an impediment to making a successful transition. So these are really the three areas that Sujit and I will talk about today. So for the 80% of you that are performing Agile development, we wanted to take a quick question here and just gauge the audience. Of those three buckets we just mentioned, what was the biggest one that caused pain or caused a hurdle for you guys in Agile adoption? Was it trying to convince the people and develop your people in a way to be more Agile and have a more Agile mindset? Was it the tooling and kind of getting off of some of that waterfall tooling or changing it in ways to work better with your new Agile process? Or was it actually changing the process itself, the cadence of meetings that you're having, the ways in which you're documenting your requirements and things of that nature? So we'll give you a second here to respond to this question. Okay, so it looks like about half of people said it was really around process, which is good because we have a lot of content here that Sujit is gonna talk to around process, and then people, and then finally tools. So this is good here, and we'll talk to each one of these sections here going forward. So the first section, and the one that you guys, I think, either you had the most trouble with or are continuing to have trouble with, as you guys make an Agile transformation, is really around optimizing your process, right? So I think, when I was thinking about this and talking about an Agile transformation and what does this mean for me as a tester, for example, I think there's really three big takeaways here as I kind of think about the experience of being a tester in a waterfall organization, very siloed, large organization with very little collaboration, and moving towards more of an Agile or iterative process. And so I really think, Agile development is going to mean more regular code delivery for most organizations, if not more regular code delivery, at least more frequent code integration. So, the code needs to be actually built and, tested more often. And so the impact of that is going to mean, number one, that, testers need to be more involved. Things are happening quickly. In the old waterfall world, there might just be one testing cycle that occurs maybe every year, if it's a yearly release, or every 2 years or more. So sometimes, testers basically would live on an island. They're really just kind of a receiver of code that's been built. They're not really integrated into the process. But when these things are happening quickly and testing needs to occur in the course of maybe 3 days or a week or 2 weeks, they really need to be more integrated and involved in the process. The second thing is that testing is going to happen a lot more regularly. So, the pain of having a test, whether that's a manual or an automated test that frequently is flaky, fails, takes a long time to run, that's going to be a pain that you experience much more often. So there's a lot more to be said about having tests that are very precise, and also being able to, get to the root cause of errors that are found during testing more quickly. So that's a pain that, will be experienced much more frequently given the more frequent release cycles and testing cycles in Agile. And then finally, testing, needs to follow development very closely. I mean, oftentimes in waterfall, there's, periods of inactivity between development finishing and builds being created, environments being stood up, and testers really aren't under the same time crunch of being in Agile, where, the whole release cycle is shrunk down much smaller. And so, testers need to be able to go and start testing on working code that's been built almost instantaneously. And that is a new mindset that really shifts away from a lot of the, more drawn-out periods of test case creation that might drag on for weeks or months, and a need for testing that can be, created and deployed very rapidly. So looking at how to really optimize the process, I think there's really three key areas that companies can look at to make their testing be really aligned with the Agile delivery process. So one is really getting testers involved early. So, getting them to the table, having them collaborate, having them be a part of these discussions that are going on, and making sure that any discussion that's, happening, it's got someone that's got a quality mindset there at the table, because oftentimes developers will not think about the effort that will be involved to test something or what the end user experience might be for someone that is using the application if we make a certain decision. So that's one that's certainly involved and will make a big change in just the overall viewpoints that are weighed when any particular decision is made. The second is, embracing the fact that we need to do frequent, maybe even continuous testing. So we really don't want to be at war with the trend that we see towards DevOps and continuous integration. As testers, we really want to be a part of supporting that and making that as successful as possible. So as Agile really pushes this DevOps mindset, as testers, we should look at ways in which we can employ a process that lets us do this testing frequently and be very efficient about that, so that we're not constantly creating more overhead and waste and being a barrier to the company releasing software quickly. And then finally, really just decreasing the time that it takes for us to go from having a requirement to actually having a test to be created. So we don't have these long periods where we can go out and sit down and write hundreds or thousands of tests. Oftentimes we'll walk out of a sprint planning meeting and we'll need to go sit down and create a test that can be run today or run maybe even in a couple hours. So whether it's manual or automated testing, we should look at ways in which we can turn around those designs into test cases very quickly. There's a lot of different ways to do that, using behavior-driven development or using exploratory testing, where we can really streamline that process and eliminate any unnecessary documentation that's going to cause that time to go from design to test to be longer than it needs to. So with that being said, I did want to push this over to Sujit to go over a little bit how Gallop manages Agile testing. So Gallop obviously works with numerous customers who are involved in making this shift to Agile and putting in an Agile testing process. And so Sujit has some real-world experience here with doing this in very large, well-known enterprises. So Sujit, would you like to give your insights here?
Yeah, sure, Kevin. So I think Kevin has covered some very pertinent points on how testing should be integrated in Agile. In fact, before I get to the slides that actually talk about our Agile assessment framework, let me just talk about some of the key aspects that differ between waterfall and Agile and what we have seen. So for one, obviously in Agile we have much more shorter integrated cycles with more frequent testing as compared to waterfall, where we know that testing happens pretty much towards the end as a separate phase. Well, in Agile, not only does the testing happen every sprint, but if a team is following, let's say, a TDD or BDD approach, then testing is happening pretty much from day one. So that is a big change and shift, not only in the mindset, but in also how do you deliver. Talking about the roles, we all know the traditional roles that we've seen in a waterfall, whether it's project managers, solution architects, dev managers, etc. In Agile, we see a completely different set of roles, like product owners and scrum masters, and to a large extent, they act as the captain and the second in command. And then we have the developers and the testers. In fact, from my experience, a lot of the organization, there is no tester role. Everybody's called a developer, even if they're performing a testing function. Then there are, processes. Now it sounds almost counterintuitive to think of Agile being led by processes, yet teams do have to follow lean processes as compared to more expansive ones in waterfall. In Agile, though, the focus is really on the outcome. So in that sense, a process is only as good as the outcome it produces, which is in turn tracked by way of metrics such as sprint velocity. The fourth point here is tools. Now, I would say that tools really play one of the most important part in pulling everything together. I mean, you can have everything in place like processes, etc., but at the end of the day, we all know that all of that has to be or have to be implemented by way of some tool or set of tools. In Agile, we focus really more on an integrated tools ecosystem. So not only do we work with testing tools, but also tools along the continuous delivery framework. Now, this is where someone like QASymphony truly stands out in that they have a robust set of tools that address all of these needs. In fact, in some ways, they are quite ahead in that they have a specific tool built around just providing reporting features. This is something that I've kind of found lacking elsewhere. Well, just as a disclaimer, I have not received anything from QASymphony to plug their products, but I thought I should bring it up. Now, can we move to the next slide? So let's say quality assurance to quality engineering, right? Quality assurance is something that we all are familiar with. These are the kind of testing activities that we've been doing in the past, having worked on waterfall projects. But we are seeing that the trend is now we are moving more towards a quality engineering kind of approach. But before that, let me just talk about the agile testing quadrants. I'm sure you must have seen this a lot. This was first described by Lisa Crispin and is actually a pretty good guideline that can help answer many questions like what are the types of testing that are needed, in fact, and who should be doing what type of testing, what processes should we follow. So, for example, when we look at first quadrant, we're basically talking about technology-facing tests to support the team. So here the goal is componentized testing that allows to isolate problems. We basically are looking at unit testing, component testing, and in most cases these are written by programmers, and in some cases where TDD is followed by testers as well. Typically the tools you come across here are like unit testing tools, built-in CI tools, STM tools, etc. And of course, this kind of testing, it makes more sense to automate it. If you look at quadrant 2, now we are focusing on business-facing tests that test the product for function flows. This is where you capture user stories as executable tests and consider the story complete only when testing is done. Typically over here, you need testers with very specific skill sets. This is where the testers leverage markups, flow diagrams, scenarios to basically come up with BDD tests, automated tests, and the kind of tools we'll come across are like Cucumber, NBehave, RSpec, Selenium, Water, UFT, etc. Now, when we come to quadrant 3, we are focusing on business-facing tests. Here the focus is on the product as a whole. This is where we are talking about testing the actual user experience, just the emphasis on the realistic use. Here you would see more of an exploratory testing, and a good part of exploratory testing happens during this phase. Now here obviously we'll be relying on people who have that strong expertise, and obviously what that means is the most important tool in this case is the people or the domain consultant that can perform exploratory testing. Finally, quadrant 4 is where we test what we traditionally call the non-functional test, like performance, stability, security. It really depends on the priorities as to who does the testing and at what point should the testing start. But given the nature of these types of testing, in most cases, these are automated. Now, continuing on, from quality assurance to quality engineering, in terms of skill set in Agile, as we move to quality engineering, we are looking for Agile testers who bring in that quality engineering skill set. That is, testers who can really work closely with developers in helping them refine requirements, and also in the case of TDD, actually write unit test cases. So basically testers who command like cross-functional skills. Also, as we move towards a shorter execution cycle, automation pretty much becomes a necessity to support the kind of velocity. So can we move to the next slide, Kevin? So yeah, I just want to talk about the Gallup assessment framework now. At Gallup, we have actually built a very customized assessment framework. This is an Agile assessment framework based on industry standards like SAFe, TPI, TMMI, and also Agile and DevOps principles. This framework actually helps benchmark Agile maturity and design target operating models for successful agile transformation, what we're seeing is that a lot of organizations are actually transitioning more and more towards an agile model. In fact, I actually am from Bay Area, and I do interact with a lot of startups or even late-stage venture capital firms, and I'd say a majority of them, almost as high as 90% of them, are following agile for their software development. But here's the thing, when you're trying to move to agile, it does throw up a lot of questions. Things like, how do I plan and estimate? What should be my strategy for test case design? How do I translate user stories to testable requirements? What kind of metrics to track? And in fact, how to ascribe significance to those metrics? What should be the ideal team composition? The thing is, the best way to answer these questions is actually to create a roadmap towards an operating model that can actually help teams work in a very efficient manner within an agile environment. This roadmap will basically comprise of test processes that are part of an agile delivery model. And how do we get to the roadmap? Well, that is where our assessment framework comes in. It is an essential tool to create this roadmap. Now, the framework that we've built is based on both objective ratings as well as subjective experiences. As far as the assessment framework, we actually focus on some of the key areas, and I'll just give you a few examples. For example, metrics. When we are assessing, what we're looking for is firstly the availability of testing metrics and how they are mapped to business metrics. For example, let's take time to market. Now, the business might be looking to reduce time to market, but what does that mean to the testing team? So what we need to figure out is how do we map this business metric to actual testing metrics, metrics like automation coverage, increased productivity, things that can basically reduce the entire cycle time. Then there is team composition. So we assess all of the relevant roles basically to identify if there's a role fit for each type of testing requirement. For example, a technical tester role, domain consultants, tool consultants. Now, as we are assessing, keep in mind the outcome that we're seeking is how we structure the team for the right engagement model. Now, if you are following TDD, then it is very important to have a technical tester in the team to write unit tests. Similarly, some of the other aspects we look at are collaboration. How do we ensure collaboration, which is very important when working in an agile environment? Are we conducting enough cross-cultural trainings? Are there enough rotations, knowledge sharing sessions, etc.? Then we also look at execution parameters, basically parameters that are very critical to testers. Now, obviously in Agile, a requirement here is basically a user story, which is very different from the SRS document. So a tester really would need to translate a user story to a testable requirement that should be tested within the sprint, which means that the user story should be clearly defined, and testers should be able to make use of test design techniques like story thinning, decision tables, and equivalence partitioning to come up with their test cases. Then other areas we focus are on like test environment. Are there simple guidelines for managing test environment? Are there separate test environments for unit, integration, system, demo, sandbox, etc.? We review tools usage for sprint management, defect management, functional performance, and automation testing. We also assess the role of tester in continuous integration, which is there a possibility of deploying builds that are self-testing through the usage of test automation? This is actually to make sure that there is end-to-end test automation eventually. Now, just to quickly skim over some of the other focus areas that we look at, those are test coverage and traceability, agile test process workflows, estimation models, automation guidelines, QA framework support for end-to-end automation in a CI environment. Then we have test data management strategy, release strategy, code review plan. So that pretty much is a snapshot of some of the other focus areas that we look on when we are assessing. Now that we know the focus areas of assessment, let me just talk about how the assessment is used. Typically, we break it up into three phases. The first of which is to actually gather, analyze, and document the data. Now, this is done by working with all the relevant stakeholders such as product owners, business team, developers, testers, infrastructure team. Typically, we review the test assets, or share questionnaires and gather information through interviews. And once we have all of this, what we do is we build a repository of test assets inventory template, organization template, resource skills templates, etc. And as we get all of this information, our next goal is to assign a rating and a priority. Now, the reason why we assign both is that once we have a clear idea of what the gaps are, and once we come up with a roadmap, it is mostly based on priority. You may have a case where there is a very low rating for a certain focus area, but it may not be high priority. So we may not want to address it immediately. We may want to push it into, let's say, more into the near future. We typically break it up into short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans. Short-term is where we can have quick gains. So, for example, a roadmap would contain, let's say, automation recommendation on what percentage of tests should be automated, what are the applications that should be targeted for automation, what kind of framework to use, provide them with an ROI analysis, guidelines on maintaining the framework. There could be recommendation on activity splicing, especially if you're working in a distributed model. For example, essentially divvying up activities based on the nature of work performed to support a more distributed model. For example, what we usually suggest is to retain domain-centric work on site, work that requires a lot of interaction with businesses. So we may recommend to keep sprint planning, architecture meetings, and testing workshops, while the rest onshore, while the rest of the work can be managed from offshore. We also provide recommendation on implementing agile processes, in fact, standardizing agile processes, providing the right team structure for the different teams, and also setting up a governance model. And some of the other things are like establishing metrics framework, implementing a TDD and BDD framework, and then tools to employ BDD. So that actually pretty much covers what is our approach towards doing an agile assessment and what essentially is the outcome of that assessment. So Ken, if you can actually just move to slide number 25, because I kind of covered 22, 23, 24. So let me just talk about a case study for an agile assessment and roadmap implementation that we carried out for one of our clients. The client is actually an event planning company that stages thousands of conventions, corporate meetings, expositions across America. When we started off with the client, they were actually at a very nascent stage in the transition from waterfall to agile. I would say that they were agile, but at a maturity level of probably somewhere around 1. So we did an assessment over 4 weeks across all of the QA groups, as part of which we found some deficiencies or gaps that had to be addressed. And I'm just going to highlight basically a subset of those. Firstly, of course, there was a lack of standardized QA processes and best practices across the different teams. Even things like test design techniques being used, metrics being tracked differed from team to team. There was a lack of clarity in user story requirements, which is making it very difficult for testers to actually write testable requirements. There were issues with the test environment being unstable. They were actually running on parallel sprint with very rigid schedule, further complicating environment dependencies. And this was actually eating into the time available for testing. As a consequence of all this, obviously what we noticed was the critical defects were actually leaking into production despite regression testing. So based on this analysis, and of course we considered many more factors, we actually provided them with a recommendation on how to go about addressing those. Some of them included, let me start off with the first one, was leverage Gallop's requirements testing framework. This is actually our own IP to improve the whole requirements review process and hence improve the quality of user stories. This really helped eliminate ambiguities early on, made sure that the user story were clear, concise, and lend themselves easily to writing testable requirements. We, of course, introduced reusable process assets to accelerate and standardize QA processes across application and sprints, which in turn really helped improve the productivity of the testers. We worked with the client team to resolve all of the test environment issues, and we convinced them to set up separate test environments, which are pretty much a clone of each other, and also introduce service virtualization to eliminate environment dependencies early on in the release. Now, just by implementing our requirement testing framework and implementing the requirements ambiguity testing, we were actually able to reduce the requirement ambiguity index from 35% in sprint 1 to 12% in sprint 3, just by improving the clarity of user stories. That's almost a drop of 2/3. We were also able to help the client meet aggressive sprint schedule with the help of reusable process templates, which actually helped improve productivity, and that way, help them meet those deadlines. Third thing, we've also implemented test automation to automate the regression suite, which has further sped up the entire test execution cycle and the feedback loop. So this is what we've been able to accomplish for one of the clients. So that sums up the case study. Kevin, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Sujit. So, as we transition from taking a really deep dive into process to kind of align with your guys' areas of interest, we do want to cover on tooling and people briefly as well, while leaving some time to answer some questions at the end here. So we'd like to know, it's supposed to be a multiple choice question, but we'll just say, I guess, if you guys can pick, I'm sorry about this, it's supposed to be a checkbox here, but at least pick one of the automation tools that you guys are using in your organization. So I apologize for that coming through. Should have been checkboxes here, but just at least note if you're using any one of these, just pick one that you're using here. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people doing unit testing, UI testing, load performance testing. Not so many people on kind of the DevOps tooling here, which is kind of what you would expect. So I think to tie back into what Sujit was talking about, these are mostly the tools that people bring in kind of towards the beginning of making an Agile shift. But a lot of these other tools around configuration management, build servers and things like that are kind of for the very high-performing Agile teams. So I'm not surprised to see the selections there. So getting into the tooling discussion here briefly, I think there's really a new breed of tools that is not only, helped Agile to be possible, but also it definitely is riding the wave of Agile and kind of the success that goes hand in hand with Agile adoption there. So I think automation, might be changing even more drastically than manual testing. So people just kind of say, hey, we're doing automation, so we're Agile. And I think that, in many ways, it's the automation that's changed the most, of the two different testing types there. So, open source, first of all, has made a huge shift. Sujit had mentioned that, but typically in the past we saw a lot of legacy automation tools that were extremely expensive. They're also extremely specialized, so to be able to afford to and to know how to run one of those tools, it was very rare. But now with open source, these are often using kind of common languages that are easy to learn or pick up, like Ruby and Python, and the tools are mostly free. So that allows, instead of having a couple specialized automation folks, that allows a lot more people to contribute to automation. So that's made it much more collaborative. Also, a lot of these tools, are able to accommodate for multiple platforms. So, you have things like Selenium that can test across browsers. Appium can test across different types of mobile devices. And so it used to be that there were very specialized automation tools that would just work with one particular UI framework or on one particular platform, but now these things are in many ways able to be used across platforms, and that's really changed the landscape of tools that are needed in any one particular organization. And then finally, there's a lot of these tools are becoming very DevOps capable. So when you look at things like Selenium, you've got Selenium Grid, you've got things like Soft Labs that are able to allow tests to run in parallel, and that is helping teams to do faster builds. And when you can do faster builds, you can do more testing and build your software more frequently. So in that way, the tools are really helping the teams to become even more agile. So we did just, include a brief overview here, but, really every category of those tools that we mentioned has undergone, an open source or, at least a best of breed push towards kind of redefining those categories. So as far as unit testing, you've got JUnit, NUnit, XUnit, many different unit testing frameworks, that are specific to the individual languages. You've got things like Selenium and Protractor driving, more open source UI testing and a shift away from things like QTP or UFT and other more legacy paid automation tools. You've got JMeter and Gatling that are really kind of putting pressure on Load Runner, Performance Center, and a lot of those older legacy performance and load tools. And as far as build goes, obviously everyone knows about Jenkins. There's things like Travis, and then there are cheaper, still paid options like TeamCity and others. You've got all sorts of orchestration tools to help the build pipeline, Puppet and Chef being the two major ones that people are adopting there. And then obviously from kind of managing all the environments you need to test in, Docker and containers, for people familiar with that, that's made it much easier to create different diverse testing environments. And also Selenium Grid helps to manage a lot of running automation on various different browser types and OSs. So very interesting the way that tools are really pushing people to be more agile, and also how these tools are kind of evolving out of the needs that people are experiencing as they sort of push the boundaries of what is agile. So we did want to give Sujit a couple minutes here to explain sort of the automation approach as it relates to Agile for Gallup.
Yeah, sure. So actually, Agile projects, present a very unique challenge. We all know that Agile projects develop functionality over time. So there's always that challenge as to how to write automated tests when the code may not even be ready. Well, there are actually ways to make automation work in Agile. Just in terms of return on investment, we all know that our priority should be to typically target smoke tests first, especially now that we are in Agile, and the philosophy is to try and deploy build as many times as possible. It makes sense to really automate these smoke tests. The next in line is obviously regression tests, to try and automate as much of the regression suite as possible. And then for the rest of the works, anything around GUI automation or API automation, what we suggest, what we propose is an action-based testing framework, which is actually a lot like keyword-driven testing framework. The reason being that it is highly modular, so it really lends itself to just-in-time automation. So in Agile, there is always that uncertainty, right? Tomorrow there's this new feature, how do I automate it? So by making it very modular, making it keyword-driven, we know that it becomes much simpler to incorporate that automation component for this new feature. In terms of the workflow that we follow in Agile, once we assess automation feasibility as soon as the acceptance tests have been authored, based on whether it's API or UI, we start off with writing pseudocode and keywords for the automation framework during the initial stage. And while once the code is ready, then we start developing the scripts for both API and UI automation. As the next step, of course, we can do an end-to-end test run in a continuous integration environment. By way of an example, we have actually implemented automation for one of our clients that had no previous automation experience. We basically helped them out with an automation strategy, build the automation framework and scripts, and also maintaining the scripts for them. We did cover both API and UI automation using Selenium and SOAP UI. And we also leverage a service virtualization tool to make sure that if there were any dependent test environments, they were made available early on. And not just some of the commercial service, virtualization tool. We've also used tools like PyMock just to simulate a REST service, etc. With the test automation in place for verifying build regression testing, they have literally gone from deploying builds every 3 days to almost nightly builds. So there is a significant ROI in test automation in Agile models. Back to you, Kevin.
Great, thanks, Sujit. And so we're going to wrap up here with a quick section on people for a couple minutes before taking some quick questions from the audience. So we saw in Sujit's earlier slide, in terms of a waterfall approach, it's very siloed. So you kind of have these separate organizations for development and operations, kind of requirements gathering, testing, and you build out these specialized teams that have a lot of levels of hierarchy within them. And so these very much so kind of vertical structures don't lend themselves to moving quickly in collaboration. And so what they do lend themselves towards is, big structured efforts of work, but they're not good for a more agile approach. So what happens in Agile is that you create these teams. Many of you guys are performing Scrum, and in those Scrum teams, you obviously need some sort of tester, and oftentimes that's an embedded tester that's within the team. So rather than the tester, being part of a larger testing team, they're really embedded into the product team, and that has a lot of impacts, obviously, on what that tester is going to do in their day-to-day role. I think I skipped one slide too far ahead. So this is what we're talking about when we discuss a new breed of tester. So, in the past, you were in an organization of many other testers, and you had kind of the luxury of, being in this team where you just work with other people, like-minded people like yourselves who do the same job, kind of have a more, structured type of day where there's not really much change or not really much adapting that you need to do to get through in your job. Agile testers have a much different experience. So first of all, they need to be able to work within a team where there's many different perspectives, skill sets, etc. So they need to be much more collaborative and ready to wear different hats as they help out different people on the team. Also, they're going to be much more broad in skill sets. So rather than being, the specific guy who does, UI automation for this one particular part of one application, instead they're going to be demanded to do maybe some automated testing, maybe help out with some manual testing, maybe help with some requirements gathering. Maybe they're going to own how to deploy code into testing environments. So they need to become much more broad and sort of transition from being extremely specialized into being more adaptable inside of their teams. So how can we develop testers? Given all of this, really, if you're a test manager, your job goes more from kind of managing testers day to day and being more of kind of a sergeant, I would say, or a lieutenant, to being more of these, kind of people developer and making sure that these people are, enabled to do a good job inside of their Agile environment. So, in terms of working on their team skills, collaboration, conflict resolution is obviously going to be huge towards making them successful. You really need to focus on how to make teams where they can hire and retain people within those teams, especially in fast-growing companies and technology companies, and trust. Typically developers never trust testers, and in a more waterfall world, they don't really have to. But in more of an agile environment, it's definitely imperative that they do. From a technology perspective, getting testers into the code and getting more manual testers to contribute to automation, even if that's just using more simple record and playback tools like Selenium IDE, it will expand their skill set. Different types of testing, so not just having one security expert, but having that security expert teach other testers how to perform that type of testing for their particular module or application for the Scrum team that they're on. And really understanding what's downstream of them in the build and release pipeline, as well as what's upstream of them, so that they can contribute to more parts of the cycle. Then finally, from a managerial perspective, Agile is really going to up the pressure because of the increased timeline. So really, people need to be ready to learn with how to deal and manage to that expectation. Estimation is obviously going to change, as Sujit said. So it's much more frequent estimation, and has much more of an impact when things go wrong. And then finally, managing to time and budget. In Agile, oftentimes this is overlooked, but it's still a key component even when you move away from waterfall. So that, at this point, wraps up the content that we have for today. So we want to turn it over to you guys to push in any last-minute questions you have. We've gotten a number of these here that Jeff has been going through, so we'll try to answer a couple here in the few minutes we have left.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Sujit. We had a bunch of questions come in on the role of the tester. I know, Kevin, you talked about that in the last section a bit. But how should managers and leaders think of the tester on Agile teams? They're no longer just possibly a tester. They're kind of a hybrid role. So how do you think about the tester? How do you hire the right people for Agile teams? Give us your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think the change is going from being just a tester to being more of the champion for quality. So I think that there's got to be a culture around quality, and the tester needs to be the person in each Scrum team or each product team that's really got an eye out for quality. And I think the other change as well is, Agile is trying to grow closer to the customer. The tester understands how the customer uses the software probably the best of anyone on the team besides maybe product manager. So having them as well have good customer-facing skills so that they could interact directly with the customer when needed, I think are two key things to look out for.
Great. Sujit, any thoughts there?
Yeah, and just to add to that, you have to remember one thing, that when we are talking about Agile, we really shouldn't be thinking about testers and developers. Honestly, so far as the Scrum Master is concerned, everybody is part of the same team working towards the same goal. So if something goes wrong, all of them are responsible. So that's, you should have that mindset. So given that, you need to have people, who not only have the right technical expertise, but also the awareness of how to integrate in that kind of a culture.
Great. And I just want to remind everyone, there's a survey coming up at the very end. And actually, if you look at your screen to the left of the Twitter icon at the bottom, that's just a little pop-up. If you click that, you can take the survey. If you have to jump off before the webinar actually ends, please do so. Let us know your thoughts. We had a couple questions come in about test estimation and the challenges of estimation in Agile environments. Can you talk about some best practices when it comes to estimation, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in terms of estimation, it's about, constantly kind of reviewing how you do. So I think that that's a key part of a sprint retrospective, is to look at an estimate and look at how accurate everyone's estimates were and be transparent about that. And for the estimates that are, off by something nominal, don't worry about that. But if it's significant, more than 20 or 30%, I think it's really appropriate to go into that and understand why that happened, really dig into that and make sure that there's a culture of accountability around estimation. I think estimates are always the most accurate when everyone can see them and see who put their names towards them. So those are definitely some ideas I have around Agile estimation.
Sujit?
Sorry, what was that, Kevin?
The question was if you had any thoughts around estimation in Agile on your own.
On your own, well, estimation in Agile is never on your own, right? I mean, it is always about the whole team. One guy can say that, okay, this is what it's going to cost, but we all know that towards the end, it's the consensus that matters, right?
Yep, I would agree.
Yep. All right, last question. We had a bunch of questions come in around, Kevin, you talked about bringing testing up earlier in the process. A lot of questions around, well, how do you do that if you're outsourcing? If you're outsourcing testing, is that realistic? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely difficult. I think some of the technology can definitely lend itself to doing that. And there are different hybrid models, I think, for sure, where some testing can be done up front and some is done towards the end of the cycle that may allow for that to happen more easily. But Sujit, do you have any ideas on that? I know that you've got some experience with outsourcing yourself.
Oh, yes. We worked with many clients, in that distributed model, and it has been very successful. Yes, of course, you have to change the approach. First thing is that so far as onshore is concerned, you have to have a strong on-site lead who will actually be the person interacting with business, with scrum masters, with product owners. This guy in turn can actually work with and coordinate with the offshore team. Having said that, despite the location, we always try to find a time of overlap, let's say towards the morning, where there will be a scrum meeting and everybody will be present in that. So while the on-site lead can work on delegating some of the tasks, but when it comes to the stand-up meeting, everybody has to be present. And what we do is we typically try to find that overlap maybe early in the morning to facilitate that.
All right, great. Well, Sujit, thank you for your time today. Kevin, thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Please remember to just stick around for a minute, take the quick 5-question survey, let us know what you think of the webinar, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.